Who will or who should survive the MLB trade deadline for the Atlanta Braves? And once the dust settles, who are some players that will really care and focus about the rest of the way? I'll answer those questions and many more on today's mailbag episode of Locked On Braves. So let's get into it.
You are Locked On Braves, your daily Atlanta Braves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, and welcome back to Locked On Braves, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, where we cover your favorite Atlanta sports teams each and every day. I'm your host, Jake Mastroianni. You can follow me on social media at ShortstopBall. Check out the podcast there at LockedOn_Braves on X and Locked On Braves on Instagram. If you're new and you're watching this on YouTube, please do me a huge favor. Hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, leave me a comment down below. All those good things here to help us out at Locked On Braves. Thank you so much for your support of Locked On Braves, making us your first listen up each and every day. And big shout out to all my everydayers out there. We've come to our favorite podcast of the week, the mailbag episode. And we got a lot of questions to get to per usual, right on the 20 mark this week of questions. Try to read through some of them, but some of these I will have to be answering kind of off the top of the head here. And as the trade deadline, obviously coming up next week, it'll be our last mailbag episode before the trade deadline. So a lot of good questions about that too, but we've also discussed that already a lot this week. You want to go back and listen to it. We had a full episode talking about Marcell Ozuna and trade fits for him. And yesterday we talked about Raisel Iglesias and where I think he could go. So you want to go back and listen to those. You'll get some more detail on what I think are the Braves' two most intriguing trade deadline candidates. But today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Let's jump into the question because, like I said, we got 20 of them. The first one's from Rob C., who says, if the Braves aggressively sold, they could probably get 3 to 4 guys that plug into their top 20 prospects. Would that alone be enough to land an up-the-middle player or shortstop or starting pitcher with control in the offseason? So it will definitely help the depth of the system, which would then allow you, I think, to trade some players from the top of your system. You're not going to get an everyday up-the-middle player through a trade without giving up one of the Braves' top 10 prospects, because it's not a farm system that's viewed as being very good anyway, although I think it is top-heavy. But it would certainly help with the depth of giving up some of those guys at the top, because then you have some depth behind them. But I don't know that will move the needle at all necessarily for them being able to acquire a lot of talent via trade in the offseason. It will definitely help, but for somebody that I think you're alluding to here, Rob, somebody that's, an everyday solidified, somebody that can play a little bit of offense and defense at shortstop and second base, or somebody that can stick in the middle, top of the rotation. They're not going to get any prospects back at this deadline that are going to help acquire those guys. The only players they're going to get at this deadline will just help with some of the depth. If you do have to trade away some of your top prospects, that at least you have some depth behind them. AAWX says, last year and this year, our offense has not been good. If it's the same situation next season, do we pull the trigger on the blow up? And if so, who are your first 3 out? And what 3 do you keep to build around? Oh, this was tough. And it depends on how long the rebuild is going to be. Because look, the first name that comes to my mind is Ronald. And you all know I want Ronald here for his entire career. I also want to compete for his entire career. And that is the hope that next year they do figure it out and they get back on track and they get back to competing and continuously being in the postseason. That is the hope. But if you do come out next year and the offense continues to struggle and you are going to have to just completely blow it up and do a complete rebuild, the best way to kick that off is trading your best player that can bring you back some really good prospects. Now, again, I'm not advocating for that, but it's the best way to expedite the rebuild, to trade one of the best players in the game and a guy that you would have to get a ton for. So I think that's the first name that I look at, but I'm absolutely hoping that doesn't happen. I think next would probably be one of the pitchers, whether it be Strider, whether it be, I probably wouldn't do Schwellenbach. I think he's somebody that I kind of build around. He's here for a while. So is Strider too, but I think Schwellenbach then might be the piece that I build around. Definitely Chris Sale, as he'd be on an expiring contract. But I think one of the pitchers, maybe Strider, Acuna. I just don't know that you can really move Riley and Olson's contracts. Olson's still a productive player, so maybe you could move him. Sean Murphy seems like an easy one there too. So again, if you were going to go in and do a full rebuild, like I'd love to just build around Acuna and say that and trade Olsen, trade Spencer Strider, and trade Sean Murphy. I think that's where my heart says, just because I want Acuna here, but Acuna obviously brings you back the biggest haul and helps you turn it around with getting top talent in return. Dustin Mount says, what would be the order you would bring up prospects to fill the bullpen and rotation after the deadline? So I think Hurston Waldrop gets the first call in the rotation, already on the 40-man, made some improvements this year. It's the end of the season. Might as well just see what those mechanical changes have done for him to see if they can succeed at the big league level as well. I mean, he's been good at the minor league level, certainly hasn't been fantastic. He's looked more like a mid-rotation, back rotation type of arm at the minor league level. But, can he have that success continually getting through 5-6 innings, 3 earned or less? Can he do that at the big league level? So I think Waldrop's the first one for me. I think J.R. Ritchie has the most upside of those guys. And then for the sake of Lindsey not crashing out, if he's listening to this, I'll say Blake Burkhalter. I love Blake Burkhalter, obviously, War Eagle. I feel like you put him in the bullpen, and that's where he's ultimately going to become and belong. I just think he's a back of the rotation starter, and I think he's a dominant bullpen arm. And I just think that's where he needs to be long term. Bullpen arms, Hayden Harris, you just got to see if it's legit. I mean, he gets the results at the minor league level. Stuff doesn't necessarily blow you away analytically, or at least visually when you're watching it, but he gets the results. So you got to see if it's legit for Hayden Harris. I'd love to see Giancarlo Lara get a call up if he continues to show the good command that he has shown lately at AAA. So those would be the two bullpen pieces. Like I said, if not Blake Burkhalter in the rotation, I'd still love to see what he could do in the bullpen, but those would be the top ones that I call up there. Going back to the last question, Josh Thomas said Acuna, Baldwin, and Schwelly are my keywords. I think that's a pretty good core to build around there too. Acuna, Baldwin, and Schwellenbach. I think that's a good answer there. Matt Karch says, why do we compare current Braves teams to previous year's teams? I feel this gave the fan base and front office false hope that the team could repeat what 2022 team did with the comeback in the standings. Hopefully this year has taught everyone not to compare teams. Look, it's happened before. It's that, it's that old adage. It's happened before. Why can't it happen now? I don't know. I mean, you can look and point to a recent example for the Braves to make it seem more legitimate that it could happen. I don't see anything wrong with that necessarily, but I do think it is obvious at this point. This team is just completely different than 21, 22, even 23 types of teams. Ben Ginsburg, would you trade Dylan Lee for a top 100 prospect? Yes. If that top 100 prospect is a position player or starting pitcher, which most top 100 prospects are, you don't see many relievers in the top 100 prospects. So yeah, if I can get somebody that can, has a legitimate chance to start and somebody that has a legitimate chance to be an everyday player, that's worth giving up a setup reliever to me. Another one from Matt Karch, who says the Braves haven't faced a so-called ace since June 29th in Ranger Suarez and still failed to win series. Teams are giving up their worst and we still lose. How did this team fall this far a year and a year and a half? That is the big question. And you're right too, Matt, because I've noticed that, the Braves just keep dodging other teams' best pitchers. We talked about it the other day on the postcast coming out of the break. You miss Max Fried in that Yankee series. You miss Logan Webb in that Giants series, and you still drop both of them. It looks like they're going to avoid Jacob deGrom in this Rangers series too. And it's crazy just how bad this team has been, how bad this offense has been, that it seems like you've avoided a lot of other teams' really good starters, and yet you still can't win these series. Rafael Rodriguez, when will the Braves be contenders again? Next year. They're going to be contenders again next year. I'm already calling it. I'm putting this season behind me, and they're going to be contenders again next season. I don't know that they'll be World Series contenders, but there's going to be a lot of shakeup in the offseason. There's going to be new directions, going to be new manager, and I'm just already kind of excited about it. I don't want to just brush past the last 2 months of this season. Hopefully you don't either, because I want you to continue to join me here and watch and comment, but they're going to be contenders again next year. I fully believe that. All right, a lot more questions left to get to on today's episode, including some about the trade deadline. We'll get into all of those here next. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day. You suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Gametime comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last minute tickets without all the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. Gametime makes it possible. You know, for Braves games or baseball games in general, checking the weather. It's the summer here in the South. There's a pop-up shower everywhere. So maybe you don't want to completely commit too early in the week, but you want to wait till the last minute and see how the weather is going to hold up. And it looks great. It looks sunny outside. You want to be at the ballpark. That's when you can check out Gametime. They're going to help you get those last minute deals. And Gametime is the official ticketing partner of Locked On MLB, making it easy to browse the app for an exciting upcoming Braves game. Ticket prices should be down in the second half of the season. Should be an opportunity to get you some cheap tickets and some good tickets to some Braves games for the final couple of months. Gametime has last minute tickets and zone deals for big savings. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app. Create an account. Use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, download the app, then create an account, use our code LOCKEDONMLB, and you're going to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Thank you as always, making Locked On Braves your first listen of each and every day. Make sure you're subscribed here to Locked On Braves on YouTube, where you get this podcast with me, you get the postcast with me and Lindsay, you get the MLB Squad show, you get a lot of great content right here in your Locked On Braves podcast feed, but also make sure you subscribe to Locked On MLB as well. You get a lot of great content in that feed, including MLB Game Night, where Lindsay's hosting over the weekend, getting you caught up on all the big highlights from each and every night. Jump back in to the questions here. Next one coming from 10-Day IL, who says, I would like to see the Braves grab a couple of buy low candidates from other teams at the deadline, like Yuneski Noel, Will Benson, Jake Fraley, etc. No harm come from it in a lost season. I don't mind doing that either, and that's kind of where I went with my idea of a trading for like a Zach McKinstry yesterday from the Tigers, somebody that has some control and also elevates the depth of your team. Maybe they're not everyday regulars, but they elevate the depth of your team. So I'm okay with doing some deals like that to get some players that maybe, aren't starters on other teams, but they're bench utility type players that could help elevate the depth of your team. Because that's what's really been hurting the Braves, just having that lack of depth. If a starter goes down or if a starter's struggling, you really don't have anybody else to go to. Caleb Cook, is Sean Murphy a Brave next Friday? Yes, I would be shocked if the Braves trade Sean Murphy. Maybe in the offseason, it might happen. I'm still on board with having both catchers going forward. There's just nothing wrong with having two really good catchers, especially if your DH spot is going to be more open and fluid going forward as well. I'm perfectly fine with keeping both guys. Hayden Harris says, Drake Baldwin and Spencer Schwellenbach both feel like pre-arb extension candidates. However, with the shape of the current roster, do you think the front office strategy on handing out those extensions could be shifting? It's a great question. One I wish I had the answer to. As a fan and seeing how some of these extensions have played out, I am less in favor of extending these guys super early. I've always been somewhat against extending pitchers early on, just because pitcher injuries, you're great one year and then you're done for your career the next. It's just how quickly it can change for pitchers. So I've always been against locking up pitchers early and giving them guaranteed money. But even on the position player side, look, Michael Harris is still really young, and I'm still very hopeful that he can turn things around and be an all-star type of player that many of us thought he could be. But look how quickly, he's declined. And now you look at, an Austin Riley, who, again, I thought it would be an MVP coming in this year. And it's not to say that he won't still be a great player, but now you're locked into that long term. So it's the excitement we had on all these extensions where we felt like everybody was going to continue to progress and that they hadn't plateaued. And now it feels like you extended them once they plateaued, and now they're kind of starting to regress. So I definitely think, at least from a fan perspective, got to be a little bit more careful with these extensions. For Baldwin especially, because you already have a catcher signed up long-term, so it doesn't really make sense to then start paying big money to another catcher long-term as well. I think with the way that it works out, once Sean Murphy's deal expires, Drake Baldwin would be into his, arbitration years and getting closer to free agency. Maybe then at that point you extend Drake Baldwin as Sean Murphy starts to phase out. Calvin Fenner says, with how Profar's batting inputs look, it's making his 2024 stand out as an anomaly. Do you think the Braves will eat the contract and try to upgrade left field this winter? I mean, I think we got to be a bit cautious with Profar. The guy set out for 80 days. And so, I mean, he's still basically just got his spring training at bats under him. I want to see what it looks like the rest of the way for sure. It feels to me like he came back and was trying to prove that power was legit. And you're not seeing him really have the at bats that I thought he hadn't been the player that I thought he was going to be coming in with the patience, the approach, and the walks. I haven't seen that Profar yet. It feels to me like he's been trying to sell out for power, maybe to overcompensate, to prove that the power was legitimate. I'd like to see him just get back to the player that he was before, giving you good at bats, getting on base, not striking out a lot, and the power comes, and great. So I want to give Profar a little bit more of a leash here. Look, if it ends up he's not that player, nobody's going to want to trade for him. I think you're just kind of stuck. I think the Braves would maybe try to move on from him, but then you're just eating, bad money at that point. So I'm really just hopeful Profar kind of at least just gets back to the player that he was before, that can get on base. And maybe he just ends up becoming a very expensive utility player for you that can play some second, play some corner outfield, a good bat off the bench, and you still look to go upgrade in left field. I'll say this kind of to maybe answer the question in its totality here. If there is a obvious place to go upgrade Kyle Tucker in the offseason and you want to pull that trigger, don't let Profar hold you back. I think that's what it ultimately comes down to. There's a big fish that you can go catch this offseason. Don't let Profar hold you back. That's what I'll say about that. Anthony Del Sandro, when the Braves trade Iglesias, do you think they should try to re-sign him this winter or move on at closer? Move on. Look, as much as I tried to talk him up yesterday and how great he's been, he's also in his late 30s, and this feels like an obvious decline for him. PJ's Braves, who are 2 to 3 players you are particularly keeping an eye on over the last 2 months of the season in terms of improvements and possible future with the team? That's pretty obvious. Michael Harris and Ozzie Albies are the 2 most watched players the rest of the way to see what they can do and what kind of hitters they can be, to see what their future is with this team. I think the Braves are certainly going to be evaluating that with Ozzie because they have the option on him this year. Are they going to pick it up or not? It's only a $7 million option with a $4 million buyout, so you're only saving $3 million. But if he's not your answer at second base, are you going to not pick up the option or pick it up and then maybe try to move him? So I think Ozzie is definitely one to watch. Michael Harris, too. Look, he's locked up long-term. You're kind of just stuck with him for better or worse. I'm hoping it's for better, but Braves certainly want to see what they have in him. So those are definitely 2 guys. Then on the pitching side, is the Joey Wentz stuff for real? He might be another name that you're watching. And then a bunch of these young guys that I think are going to get called up. State CR says, assuming Snit retires at the end of the season, who are your best options as replacements? So from what we've heard right now, and I know there was the rumor going out there by one reporter who won't be named that just isn't always trusted, that said Skip Schumacher was a legit candidate. He and Walt Weiss. I'll say Schumacher makes some sense, definitely. David Ross, another name that's kind of been floated out there. I would say of what I've heard so far and what we've kind of heard in the media, Walt Weiss, if you wanted the safe choice, if you just wanted to keep things, status quo the way they are, Walt Weiss would be the obvious candidate and choice. If you wanted to shake things up a good bit, I think Skip Schumacher would be the choice. You want to go with kind of a familiar player who knows the Braves, but could also be a little bit different, more new age, younger. And so would Skip Schumacher fit that role too? I think David Ross. David Ross is kind of becoming my front guy for the job. I just think he makes a lot of sense. Again, he's been with this franchise. I think he's a smart guy, a smart manager. I think he's a good manager. I know he only had the 1 winning season in Chicago, but that was just a bad team, and they kind of let him go as the team was starting to get better. He was kind of that gap guy. So I like David Ross. Of course, of managers that are out there right now that I think could be available, Torey Lovello, I talk about him all the time. If you could get him away from Arizona, he's one of my favorite managers out there. So those would be some of the guys on my list. Next question is also kind of similar. Justin Shoemake says, with Snit retiring, most likely, I've heard names like Weiss, Shoemaker, and Ross to take over as manager. I feel like Mark DeRosa would make a good young manager. Thoughts? But also, do you think the new manager keeps the same staff or brings in all new coaches? Depends on the coach. I can't imagine they would let Kranitz go with how well they've done with the pitching staff. I don't think the Braves would go with a first-time manager in Mark DeRosa. I know he's had some interviews to manage elsewhere, and so he's had some experience in that. It would just be a tough sell for me to just all of a sudden hand over the reins to a Mark DeRosa who's never had any real managerial experience. I know he managed the Team USA, and he's going to be doing that again. That's going to be a tough sell for me on DeRosa. Maybe a good manager one day. I just don't know if this is the spot for a team that you want to win now to give it over to a first-time manager like that. Another one from Hayden Harris, who says, Alexopoulos' stealth and silence is cool when the Braves are performing up to expectations. When the team isn't performing, his public absence definitely comes off a little different. Thoughts on that? I think that's just his MO, whether they're good or bad. I don't know, because they've only been good. The Braves have only been good since he's been in Atlanta. So it doesn't really bother me. Look, if you've learned anything over the past year, is you can't really trust anything that comes out of Alexopoulos' mouth anyway. He'll talk, obviously, after the trade deadline. He always does. It's one of the few times during the year where we hear from him. But it's GM speak at this point. I don't really know what I can believe when he talks anymore, so I just really don't care to hear him talk anymore. Big Dog Fan 73, how would you grade the Braves over the last 3 years rebuilding the minor leagues after emptying it to acquire Olsen, Murphy, and keep the majors stocked between the draft and finally being able to use the international market? So this might be a hot take and maybe one that a lot of you don't agree with, but I think the Braves have done a fantastic job drafting and developing players. I think they've done a great job in the draft, especially with where they've had to pick and how little bonus pool money they've had to work with. I think they've done a fantastic job in the draft and identifying talent and developing that talent. What has really hurt them has been the international prospects that they've signed. And now, granted, they had the restrictions for a while, but we've been out of that for a few years now. And it takes a long time for those guys to click, but we really haven't had anybody, at least on the position player side of things, that they signed internationally that has done much of anything to this point. A lot of them are still young, still possible. I'm still crossing my fingers that Ambiorus Taveras figures out how to hit the baseball more consistently, because I think the defense is there. We're still hopeful on a Jose Perdomo. Luis Guanipa just returned and is looking pretty good at Augusta. Diego Torrens is tearing up the Dominican League. So there's some hope there, but they just really haven't hit on very many of their international prospects. And I think that's what's really hurting them back on the position player side. There is no doubt they have been crushing it in the draft on the pitching side of things and developing pitching and having arms continually coming up and in the system. But certainly the position player side of things has been really devastated because they have not hit on really any of these international prospects just yet. All right, we got about 3 or 4 more questions to get to, and then we'll wrap things up. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode is brought to you by Gameday Hue, and so that's why I'm wearing this great Gameday Hue hat. For Locked On Braves fans like me, this one hits the mark. It's Friday. I'm wearing my Friday red, as you should be too. I don't care. Home, away, I still wear my Friday red, and it matches my Gameday Hue hat as well. Gameday Hue makes clean, no logo gear with team-inspired colorways for every pro and college fan base. It's all about letting your colors speak for you. No giant logos, just smart, versatile style that works on game day on the course or anywhere in between. The hat pairs perfectly with my usual gear. It doesn't replace my team's logo stuff. It just adds to the lineup, and it looks so fancy and so cool that my wife lets me wear it wherever we go, so I don't have to worry about that too. And it's not just hats. Check out their split shade gloves made for the golf course, or the perfect gift for the fan who has everything. And right now you can get 15% off with code MLB15 at GamedayHue.com. That's GamedayHue.com. The code even stacks on bundled deals, so now is the time to load up. So let's your colors talk, because colors speak louder than words. That's Gameday Hue, code Locked On, or code MLB15. Again, that's code MLB15 for 15% off at GamedayHue.com. All right, we got a few more questions to get to. Papachi says, who was the one Brave growing up that really wowed you and made this team your team? For me, it was Ron Gant. He looked like an action hero out there to 8-year-old me, and I even mimicked his batting all the way through college. So for me, as a defensive guy, it was Andrew Jones. I mean, I grew up an Ozzie Smith fan. I followed, once he retired, I followed Royce Clayton at shortstop, who was a great defensive player in his own right. But then I fell in love with Andrew Jones for the Braves. Obviously, was always watching the Braves growing up on TBS, and that's what my mom had on every night. So watched a lot of Braves, but Andrew Jones was that player for me early on, just watching him play in center field. Just truly amazing. And then obviously for Call come along, and then the shortstop in me really fell in love with him. And then later Andrelton Simmons. So again, as a defensive guy, that's always kind of what's wowed me. So Andrew Jones was that one player early on, and then the Vercall years as well. Those were a couple of players that really just wowed me and turned me into, not just a Braves fan, but then having that Braves player that I could kind of latch onto like I did with an Ozzie Smith when I was even younger. Another one from Hayden Harris, who says, you proposed a deal to the Tigers where the Braves would get Zach McKinstry in return. Could a similar deal be made for Josh Smith of the Rangers? I've just always liked his profile and versatility. And Hayden, I don't know if it's you or not, but I get a lot of questions about Josh Smith. Look, I don't mind trading for Josh Smith. I think it's a very similar thing to Zach McKinstry. I don't see Josh Smith as the everyday shortstop going forward, but I think he would elevate that depth for the team. I'm not sure how much control Josh Smith has left. I also just don't know how that deal works for the Rangers. I'm not sure what position the Rangers are in right now. Josh Smith, 27 years old, looks like he is locked up through arbitration through 2028. So several years of control left. I just don't know what that looks like for the Rangers, because I don't know exactly where the Rangers are or what you would give up for him in that. But yeah, I mean, he fits that similar idea that I talked about earlier in the podcast, just getting a deal for somebody that's maybe not a starter, but somebody that elevates your depth, that's under control for a while and doesn't cost you a lot. So I definitely wouldn't hate that. I just don't know how that works and lines up with the Rangers. Last one from Judy Chops, who says, why are the Braves so hesitant to bring up some of their bullpen arms like Hayden Harris? Only thing I can think of at this point is that, they were still holding out some hope that they were going to get back in this, and they didn't want to really put that much pressure on some young guys and experienced guys, and just continue to lean on some of the more veterans like a Rafael Montero and even a guy like an Enio De Los Santos and others. But at this point, just why not? And again, I think we'll see a lot of that after the trade deadline is over. But at this point, why not just call up these guys and see what they can do? And they're so aggressive in calling up starting pitchers to the point that they call up a 20-year-old that definitely wasn't ready yet. And it was clear from the jump that he wasn't ready yet. They're so aggressive in calling up starters, but yet so hesitant to call up bullpen arms. Now, part of that is I don't think they've had a lot of really good bullpen arms in the past. Now they suddenly do, with Daysbel, who should be up, Dylan Dodd, who just transitioned over to a reliever role, Hayden Harris, Carlos Lara, even a Domingo Gonzalez, guys like that. They have some pretty good arms now at the upper levels. Roldy Munoz, that I don't know why. Bullpens are so important, and you need those impact arms, and yet they just continue to try to spend $30, $40 million of your budget on those arms instead of just relying on some of these talented arms that you have in your system. It doesn't mean they have to be relievers forever. But yeah, it is frustrating for me, and it's been frustrating for a while, the fact that they don't transition some of these starters to relievers earlier on to get them to the majors quicker. And then, at that point, evaluate and see about turning them back into starters, but don't even take the good bullpen arms that you have and at least give them opportunities to see what they can do. So it is highly, highly frustrating the way that they have, the lack of urgency, the lack of commitment to some of the bullpen arms in the system. But hopefully that's going to change here in the second half. All right, that is all of the questions that I have today. Thank you so much for joining me on today's live episode. You got Hat May in here complaining about Dansby Swanson. He's gone. Braves weren't going to pay that price. Mr. Tech Biz says, Jake, if forced to trade one of Albies or Murphy, who would you trade and why? Albies. It's pretty clear for me. I think the Braves could make a big upgrade there. And like I said earlier, I have no problem having both Murphy and Baldwin. Some might depend on return, but you just asked me straight up, who would I rather have over the next 2 or 3 years? I'd rather have Sean Murphy than Ozzie Albies. And that's no disrespect to Ozzie. Again, anytime you talk about Ozzie, love the guy. I think he's great for this team. I think that's why he's gotten such a longer leash than most. Larry Day, Josh Thomas, Todd Twilley, and Nathaniel Brooks, thank you all for joining me here on today's live episode of Locked On Braves. We'll be back with the postcast tonight, me and Lindsay, and throughout the weekend. And obviously, anything happens over the weekend trade-wise, we'll be jumping on and doing an emergency podcast. We have had some trades go down. We talked about it yesterday. The Mariners getting Josh Naylor. Yankees have swung a trade for Ryan McMahon. The Mets got a trade for Gregory Soto, so they got their lefty in the bullpen. So that maybe takes out an Aaron Bummer possibility there to the Mets. But we'll keep you up to date through the weekend if anything were to happen. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube if you're new. Hit the thumbs up button. Leave me a comment down below. Make sure that you rate, review, and subscribe to the Locked On Braves podcast wherever you get your podcast. And we will talk to you next.